This is Michael Bell with you once more with the CVB Challenge, the Christ Verse per Book Challenge, in which we're looking at a Christological, Messianic, Jesus-centered passage in each of the 66 books of the Bible, showing Jesus to be the Word of God. He's the center of the entire Bible and of each of its books. And we've reached the book of Hosea, chapter 11, verse 1. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. We know this has to do with Jesus because in Matthew chapter 2, verse 15, the inspired writer identifies the flight to Egypt that Jesus underwent with Mary and Joseph in his infancy with this particular text. I'll remind you, the wise men had come from the Orient looking for a king that had been born. They go to Jerusalem, which was the logical choice, the royal city. But Herod says, I haven't had a child. They quickly look in the Bible, and Micah 5:2 says that the Messiah is to be born in Bethlehem. So the Magi go and worship him there, and then they're warned in a dream to go in a different direction. But Joseph's also warned that he needs to flee to Egypt because Herod then wants to kill this pretender to the throne who isn't his own son, but somebody else's son who has apparently been born as king of the Jews. Now, this seems like a passing matter of little incident, that Jesus as a baby would have been taken by Joseph and Mary to Egypt. Later on, as you know, after the death of Herod, they return to Egypt. They don't settle in Bethlehem, but go back to Nazareth, where Joseph and Mary had been living prior to the census being given that's described in the book of Luke. Now, this flight to Egypt is huge from a theological standpoint because Egypt was associated with Israel's slavery. Israel, for some maybe 250 years of the 430 years mentioned in the Pentateuch, had been enslaved. After the days of Joseph, a new dynasty arose that didn't know Joseph. And until the days of Moses, the children of Israel had been enslaved. And they cried out with a loud voice to the Lord, pleading their case. And it's interesting that in describing Moses' life in the Hall of Faith, the famous chapter 11 of the book of Hebrews, here's what it says about Moses. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, so he's a prince, in line to inherit the throne, really, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. So Moses renounces his princely state to identify with Israel's and their slavery, in their slave state. And as you know, he begins to work towards freeing the Israelites from that slavery, identifying with them as if he were a slave, and abandoning, as it were, his crown, his glory, his palace, his riches, to identify with the slave people. Now, this is exactly what Jesus is doing. And even as a baby, then, he's showing himself, in a sense, to be born into slavery, born into everything that Egypt connoted regarding slavery. And it was an abject slavery because the Israelites were politically enslaved, economically enslaved, spiritually enslaved. They were enslaved in every meaningful way we can think of. Even some of them were idolaters, and they were enslaved to their idolatry, and all of them were enslaved to their sin. And Jesus, like a Moses, leaves his crown, his royal heritage, and is born into slavery. And you would say, well, Jesus was never a slave. No, but he identifies with us in our slavery. And he was subject to his parents. He was subject to the earthly authorities. He was subject to all the physical kinds of sufferings that enslave us, whether it's sickness or whether it's thirst or whether it's hunger. He even took on the yoke of the law, which was another kind of slavery that enslaved Israel. Later on, when they leave Egypt, they are given the law. And in Galatians chapter 4, that is described as being a yoke. And it says that Jesus took on that yoke as well, along with all the other yokes that Israel and hence humanity has experienced. And so in essence, Jesus is going into the prison to be a prisoner so that he can set captives free. He's going into Egypt as a slave, if you will, in order to deliver those who are in slavery. And so this is a beautiful story of redemption. Everything that has to do with the Exodus out of Egypt is a picture of Jesus' wholesale redemption, in which he frees us from everything: spiritual slavery, ultimately economic and political and physical, any kind of slavery, emotional, whatever slavery we have here on this earth as fallen creatures in a fallen world. Jesus will deliver us from those things. Now, if Jesus is on every page of the Bible, including in Hosea, shouldn't he be on every page of your life and mine?